This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
I want to try and hit the ground running this morning with the intros because I overslept. And I'm trying to rapidly catch up on emails from work as I'm doing this, even though it's my day off. I don't think there's anything interesting to rant on in the wrestling world right now. AEW still sucks. WWE is WWE. I think that about covers it, right? Well, if you've been watching the show for a while now, you know what you're in for with the Friday show. Got the classic wrestling to talk about today. If I can somehow not get distracted for more than 5 minutes, and we'll probably be able to get through this podcast in, say, 2 or 3 hours. I've never been good at multitasking. It's one of my weaknesses. I've tried to juggle a billion things at once. More often than not, it ends in sheer catastrophe. But we'll try and get through it. Make sure y'all subscribe, comment, like the show. The stuff that makes the world go round. We are on YouTube and Rumble every Monday and Friday for more wrestling talk. We have the upcoming Monday podcast where we'll be venturing into more discussion on WWF and WWE content. And boy, am I just salivating thinking about what wonders await me with Retro Raw from 1994. Or maybe that's just my stomach churning. Well, anyway, let's get going with the show. Of course, kicking things off with Crockett TV on the Superstation. I always love when I look at my notes and I'm totally caught off guard with things that I wrote down. First thing my notes say about Crockett TV this week. Hiro Matsuda kills Tommy Young with a sleeper hold. Of course, without the context, my immediate thought is, Hiro Matsuda did what? And then once I recall what actually happened, then I'm reminded, what the fuck was Hiro Matsuda doing in Crockett Promotions in 1987? Well, as we came to find out, the answer was to choke out Tommy Young with a sleeper hold. And apparently, I totally forgot this was a thing, he actually becomes an instrumental part of the Luger Dusty program. This was not a one-off appearance. No, he actually sticks around for a little bit. God, there's so much stuff I forgot about during this period. Like the vivid memories I thought I had about Starrcade 87. And then there's all the stuff that preceded it. Those memories are not as vivid as I'm remembering them to be. We'll talk a little more in depth about the Matsuda angle later on. But for now, and I finally get the chance to do this, been waiting for this moment forever, we go to the ring for our opening bout, and it's the official debut of Sting! Yes, Sting. He's finally made his arrival to Crockett Promotions in October of 1987. Now, we've seen some of the UWF clips, but now we get our first look at Sting on the Saturday Superstation here at the Atlanta studios. And he got to wrestle one of the gladiators. I think it was number 1, but I don't know if that's really important. But it's the classic Surfer Sting look that we all came to grow up worshiping as little stingers. The blonde mullet, the colorful face paint, bright ring gear, and as we came to learn during his promo immediately afterwards, a big ball of energy. While probably not my favorite incarnation of the Sting gimmick, man, when you go back and see old footage of the Stinger from this point up until the late 90s, when we saw the complete overhaul with the gimmick repackage and they were doing the whole dark, mysterious crow sting, it's still baffling to me after all these years to think those two gimmicks were worked by the same exact guy. And that's not to say that I wasn't a fan of Surfer Sting. Of the few redeeming qualities there were when it came to the Jim Herd era of WCW, Sting was one of the redeeming qualities. And we'll be seeing plenty more of him in the coming months, especially as we start gearing up for the first Clash of Champions in '88. But man, you want to talk about the rocket ship pushes a lot of young guys get over the years? People often talk about the Brock Lesnar push in WWE or Goldberg in WCW, whatever big rising star that caught fire out of the gate, and the major organizations were doing everything in their power to make sure to establish that this guy was going to be a future main eventer. Think about this. Sting went from debuting on television for Crockett in October of '87. You fast forward to March of '88. He's not only main eventing the first Clash of Champions show with Ric fucking Flair, but he's wrestling for the World Heavyweight title. Like, you want to talk about rocket shipping somebody to the top of the card? Sting got the rocket ship push. Less than 6 months into his debut. And this was far from a great showcase match. It was fine for what it was, but Sting was greener than a pepper tree here. I mean, they weren't even properly calling his finish at this point. Like, he hits Gladiator with the Stinger splash in the corner for the pin. David Crockett referred to it as a running elbow. Totally underselling it. Like, no emotion or conviction with his delivery at all. And then we got the Stinger promo, talking about how wired up he's here to be on WTBS. Things are heating up for Starrcade 87, and he wants to be a part of it. I believe he specifically noted, his red blood cells are pumping. This is great. Right as Tony says, well, thanks, Sting. Glad to have you on board. Sting pauses, and he looks at Tony, and he does the signature, "Oh!" call. I mean, at the time, you watch the match, you're not really blown away with anything you see, but man, you just look at the intensity on this guy's face. When he's at the booth doing this promo, he's got the look. Like, you're just thinking, this guy's got something. He's going to be a breakout star, no question. I just don't think the people expected it to happen so soon. Definitely an historical moment, though. Can't gloss over that debut. It's a big one. Then we came back for the Sheep Herders versus David Isley and John Savage. And after the first 5 minutes of watching Sting debut in this huge TV moment, going from that to this was pretty much the equivalent of watching paint dry. They had the longest, most boring squash of all time. Luke and Butch did all their usual wacky offense. A lot of stomps, a lot of kicks, a lot of chops. They stuck their tongues out a lot. And then they hit their double gutbuster for the 3 count on Savage. Not the Macho Man. John Savage. I don't believe a relative of the Macho Man or the Poffo family, but I could be wrong. I mean, literally the only thing I got out of it. That and Johnny Ace being the most useless side piece of all time. They also did a promo afterwards, claiming that the annihilation process has begun. Their mission to eliminate all the tag team competition has begun. To which I then asked, what teams, aside from all the makeshift jobbers you've been beating on television? Beyond that, I have no idea what they said. All I remember is Butch tried to do a chicken dance in front of David Crockett. David was having none of this. You have never seen a man so offended by another wrestler's presence. It was quite glorious. Then we came back to the Starrcade Control Center. In addition to Tony heading the conversation, he's also there oiling Jim Crockett's tin can neck, so we can hear him speak for a couple major announcements. One of those subjects being Ron Garvin's upcoming title defense at Starrcade, as he will not be defending the title from this point until Starrcade, in order to secure that match actually takes place. He will indeed be defending his belt against Ric Flair in a cage. The rematch for the NWA World's Heavyweight title. And we also had Garvin in studio to touch on the match. Very paint-by-numbers deal where he talked about being a defending champion. He said that being the World Heavyweight Champion is a greater accomplishment than getting married, having children, and winning $1 million. So Ronnie was obviously red-pilled. Aside from that, he didn't really have much to add. We also had Jim Crockett make official the unification match for the TV title between Terry Taylor and Nikita Koloff. After meeting with Commissioner John Ayers from the UWF, they agreed on having the beef settled by having both titles at stake in a winner-take-all. So, there's a couple more matches announced for the card. Kind of weird how they just randomly threw out the Flair-Garvin rematch in the open like that. You know, Garvin kept saying for weeks, I'll give Flair his rematch for the belt when I'm ready. Well, that apparently didn't take too long for him to get ready, because it is signed, sealed, and soon to be delivered. At which point, we go back to the studio for a Barry Windham promo. And I'll admit, I did my best to try to pick up on some of the dialogue here. Barry was not very good at projecting, so with all the rabid screaming fans in the background, it was hard to pick up on anything he said. He talked about his upcoming match at Starrcade with Dr. Death for the UWF Heavyweight title, acknowledged that they're good friends, but they don't really have a beef or a grudge. To which I then asked, so why are we having the match then? I guess the short and simple answer is they had nothing else for Barry to do, so they just decided this would be the best case scenario to get him on the card. Let's have him do a babyface match with Dr. Death Steve Williams for a completely worthless regional belt with no heat. And it's funny, I don't really remember that match taking place. I wonder if it was all that memorable. Then we cut to Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard versus Rocky King and George South, which is a pretty fun little squash, all things considered. George South is now trying to grow his hair out. It has now reached the scruffy afro stage. He basically looks like Dax Harwood if Dax had hair and didn't keep himself properly groomed. But Tully and Arn toyed around with them for a little while until Arn gave South the big spine buster off the ropes. And then he tagged in Tully so he could put him away with the slingshot. I also enjoyed Rocky trying and failing to break up the pinfall count at 3.1. So Arn, without missing a beat, grabs this guy by the hair, deadlifts him up into a gourd buster, and then Tully looked around very confused. And then he raised his arms in the air and went, "Yeah, we're the Horsemen, baby." Fucking love these two guys. Moving on, though. In exhibit number 304-C of Terry Taylor being the worst heel in Crockett Promotions, because absolutely nobody wants to boo him, Taylor wrestled Larry Stevens in what I think was a TV title defense. I actually had to remind myself that Taylor was still the UWF TV champion and not the NWA TV champion. Because, well, for those keeping track at home, the heels still have possession of Nikita's stolen TV belt after Jim Crockett made it abundantly clear that they needed to hand the belt back to Nikita if they know what's good for them. Well, it's been like 2 weeks. They still have it. And again, I remind you, the fans are supposed to hate Terry Taylor and Eddie Gilbert for this. Most of them were kind of ambivalent toward Eddie. Absolutely nobody in the studio crowd wanted to boo Taylor. Most notably the girls. So you'll be shocked to hear Taylor dominated Stevens and kicked his ass for several minutes. The people cheered everything he did offensively, including him getting the win with the figure four. At which point, we go back to the booth where, as I wrote down here, Eddie Gilbert begins burying the company and talking about how everybody that's currently employed to the NWA are decrepit old dinosaurs. He says the NWA has been around for 80 years, and while it's responsible for producing great world champions, the UWF is going to produce bigger stars and a bigger legacy. Someone should have clued Eddie Gilbert into the reality of where the UWF stood by this point in 87. Apparently, he did not already get the memo that this company was dead to rights. Maybe he still had hope. And, well, I don't remember how they exactly concluded this, but I do remember Gilbert spending another 2 minutes talking about John Ayers, to which the obvious question comes up. You know, for all this talk about UWF Commissioner John Ayers on this show, I've got to be very transparent about it. Who the fuck cares about John Ayers? Seriously, did they actually think the NWA fans gave two flying fucks about the UWF commissioner? Like, they're bringing up John Ayers in like every segment now. We've never seen the guy on camera one time. Like, I get he was a former football player. There were probably a handful of sports fans watching at the time that knew who he was. But, I don't know. This is like Vince Russo type booking where you have to mention all these offstage hands and executive figures, thinking everybody watching already knows who they are. Everybody's an insider. We all know who the higher up authorities are in the company. I didn't give a fuck who John Ayers was. Now, granted, I didn't watch these tapes in real time back in 87 because I wasn't born by the time these shows aired. But even seeing the old footage later on, not one time did I get done watching an NWA Crockett show and think, man, I'd really like to hear them elaborate more on this UWF commissioner, John Ayers. He seems like a major player. Maybe I'm the only one. So here's where we got a little more insight on the Hiro Matsuda Horseman angle from the cold open. And again, I don't remember this story at all. I had no memory that Matsuda was ever involved in the hype to the Luger-Dusty feud, or that he was at any point a hired gun for J.J. Dillon. And now that I'm seeing the old footage back in real time, I'm still not entirely sure why his involvement was necessary. Basically, to follow up on the NWA Pro clip where Matsuda put the sleeper hold on Tommy Young, this was done for demonstration purposes in JJ's continual quest to prove that Dusty's Weaver Lock is a modified chokehold. He is so desperate to prove that point that he brought over Hiro Matsuda from Japan so that he could demonstrate an oriental version of the sleeper hold, just to display the difference between that and Dusty's version of the sleeper. This is some real straining on JJ's part to prove a point, but sure, we'll go with it. So he puts the sleeper hold on Tommy Young, and he goes out in a matter of seconds. And because JJ and Matsuda refused to give him the pat on the upper shoulder so they could revive him, Tommy Young begins to go into a fit of convulsions, which naturally brings in Johnny Weaver to quote-unquote save his life. And after reviving Tommy, he starts getting into it with JJ, going so far as to slap him across the face as hard as humanly possible. And in one of the more comedic moments of this week's show, after Johnny slaps JJ, he then does a full 360 to look at Matsuda. And I think the idea here was that Matsuda was supposed to immediately cut off Weaver and put him in the sleeper hold. That is not entirely what happened, though. Instead, Weaver turns around to look at Matsuda, and his eyes bug out, and he's trying to sell the "oh shit, I'm about to get wasted" expression. And there's about an 8-second pause. Johnny Weaver is completely frozen in place. He's got this cartoonish oversell as Matsuda takes about 30 seconds to realize, oh, that's right, I'm supposed to attack this man. So, about a year too late, he finally attacks Johnny Weaver, and he puts him in the sleeper hold, at which point Weaver begins to cough up fake blood. And as a couple of the locker room babyfaces run out for the save, we get Dusty doing the confrontation with Matsuda before JJ puts the kibosh on that. God, Dusty's standing there with his titties bouncing all over the place. And they really needed to have a giant censor bar over the screen at that point. Shield the women and children. Look away. That's basically all there was to it. A totally forgotten angle in the annals of wrestling history. This was totally worth sitting through, though, if for strictly getting to see Johnny Weaver's goofy oversell as he waited for about 5 hours to get attacked by Hiro Matsuda because he missed his cue. And then naturally we cut back to the studio with JJ and Luger. Luger's doing the heel promo on Dusty and put himself over, saying he's the fastest rising star in the business. I believe his exact line, and I'm paraphrasing slightly here, but this is essentially what Luger said. I'm in the upper stratosphere, moving up. So he's now reached the peak of the stratosphere, the very tippy top, and yet somehow he is still ascending. I find that hard to believe, that Luger could defy the law of physics like that. He also told people that there can't be a Starrcade without Luger booked on the card, which means that if Dusty wants a U.S. title match, he has to meet the Horseman's contractual demands. At which point, JJ threatens Jim Crockett for trying to play mind games with the Horseman, and at no point ever stipulates what contractual demands that Dusty is going to have to meet to get that match signed. So we're in the dark. Still. And then we came back for one of the goofiest segments I've ever seen. Oddly enough, who should be involved but Paul Jones. The epitome of goofy gimmicks in the year 1987. And everybody surrounding him at the time. So, well, I'm going to do my best to explain what happened here, and we'll see if we can make any sense of it by the end. They've been hyping up the debut of the mighty Wilbur, and, well, he finally showed up on NWA Pro, and while he's coming out to the ring flanked by Jones, Wilbur is shaking all the people's hands as he's walking down the aisleway. He's a a friendly giant of sorts, kind of your prototypical babyface Andre. And he goes in there, does a very sportsmanlike squash, one of the local job guys, I don't even remember who it was. And after he wins with the splash, Paul is directing Wilbur to beat up the job guy and lay waste to him. But Wilbur's not obliging. He's not a cold-hearted bastard. So Paul goes into one of his over-the-top feats of rage, tells Wilbur that he plunked out a lot of money to bring him in, so he better do as he's told, elsewise they're going to have some issues. By the way, this is all being picked up over the house mic, as Johnny Weaver is basically standing there in between them with the mic held out, saying, and I quote, "I'm just trying to pick up on the conversation, Paul. Nothing personal," as he's practically ramming this microphone down Paul Jones's gullet. And the payoff is Wilbur patting Jones on his top hat. Jones then blows a gasket, and he tells Wilbur to hit the bricks. And, well, I have no idea what the fuck they were going for here. I guess we're intended to believe that the mighty Wilbur was possibly not a proper fit for this collection of evil, wacky goons that was the Paul Jones Army. He was 450 pounds of huggable compassion. And Paul Jones did not approve of this. It's, I don't know. It's like Plankton trying to get SpongeBob to be assertive. Or something to that extent. And I will admit, Paul Jones was absolutely phenomenal in his overselling here. We've already accepted the fact that he's a total parody of a Looney Tunes character. I just don't really know what else there is to say about it. I will be seeing a little more of the mighty Wilbur on this show, so I guess we'll see how long it takes before Jones gets fed up with these acts of kindness. But again, I don't really know what they're trying to do here. I guess it's the anti-Beauty and the Beast storyline, where Paul's not trying to tame the monster. He's trying to bring out the evil in the monster. But will he succeed? Oh, in the meantime, let's go to Kevin Sullivan versus Tony Suber, where my notes are virtually blank because I wrote down almost nothing about the match. It was short. Sullivan chopped him and beat him up in a few minutes. And then he won with a weird-looking modified crossface. And then he cut a very long-winded promo where he basically plugged the Starrcade card and essentially put over all the baby faces, which was very weird. I thought Sullivan was a full-fledged heel. And the longer this promo went, the more I just kind of stopped paying attention because it just droned on for hours and hours. Kind of like most Kevin Sullivan promos. He can talk your ear off, and by the end, he'll still say a whole lot of nothing. At which point, we pitch back to the ring for Jimmy Valiant and Bugsy McGraw versus Rex King and Alan Martin. The bad comedy portion of Crockett TV continues as we go from Paul Jones Army Wacky to whatever in the fuck Handsome Jimmy and Bugsy were doing. Some might call it wrestling, if you're a kind enough person to do so. It was something. I don't even know how they won. I presume by cheating, because it's a Jimmy Valiant match. There was probably a lot of hair pulling and eye gouging involved. And then they do a promo with Tony afterwards, which was equally as baffling as the 45-second match. Here's everything I got out of it. And if somebody has the tape on hand and they want to go back to clarify if I missed anything important, by all means, please inform me. I would love to be proven wrong that what I witnessed here wasn't Morse code. Valiant said something about him and Bugsy teaming up in the Omni, and Bugsy read a poem about buying arrows wholesale. And they were very quick to cut away from the promo. I have to imagine it was done on purpose. They said, this thing has totally gone off the rails. Ended before they hijack the show and go on for another 15 plus minutes. So just to recap, Valiant and Bugsy are going to wrestle in the Omni, and Bugsy wants to buy arrows. Yeah. Got to admit, that was awful. I don't even know what else to say. Which is truly not out of the ordinary for most Bugsy McGraw Jimmy Valiant segments. I am usually left speechless after a lot of the stuff I see from them. I'm yet to uncrack the code. How does one actually comprehend Bugsy and Handsome Jimmy segments? At this point, I'm convinced that LSD would have to be involved. And then we came back for a Dusty promo. He's on the hunt for Hiro Matsuda in Greensboro. He's also here to inform us that he did not go to college to get a formal education. He went to college to play football and party with hot babes. He was a frat boy. That's, not all that surprising. Kind of a reflection on the current higher education system these days. Don't most people go to college anymore to drink, party, and goof off? It's not like degrees are worth the paper they're printed on anymore. Just a way for people to pretend they're special by framing something on the wall and saying, I did a thing. Yeah, a lot of people do. And most of them are completely unqualified for the positions they take up. Then we had the Rock and Roll Express versus Robbie Idol and Eric Long. Ricky Morton still had the taped up chest and shoulder, selling the injury from the Midnight's beating. And these job guys were so feckless, they still somehow managed to lose to a handicapped Rock and Roll Express in approximately 90 seconds. With a double DDT of all things. Not even the signature dropkick. And then coming back, we had what I can merely best describe as the most generic copy and paste Horseman promo in the history of television. And yet, it was still one of the better things on the entire show looking back. Tully, Arn, and JJ are out at the booth. Arn's talking about how the Horsemen are the symbol of excellence. Nobody's brave enough to sign on the dotted line to face them for the World Tag Titles at Starrcade. Tully's talking about the fact that Ricky showed a lot of guts and courage when he went into that original title match wounded. Meanwhile, nobody was covering the fact that Arn and Tully went into that match injured, because they don't need to make excuses for when they're beaten up. They go into every match masking their wounds. And, all things considered, the Tully line about the Horseman being injured before that title match was funny. Obviously because he's full of shit and everybody knows it. But even when it was over, I was like, that was a total go through the motions for Horseman promo. They had some talking points. They had their catchphrases. And that was it. And when it was over, I said, that was still a great promo. Even the Horsemen at 50% effort are top notch. Which I guess goes to show how great the Horsemen truly were. Shocker. I know. And then we had Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin versus the Thunderfoots. And I know what you're probably thinking right now. Wait, the Jimmy Garvin Freebirds run didn't happen until like 89, right? Well, being officially recognized as a Freebird, yes, I guess you would be right. But yeah, they were indeed teaming together here well before Garvin was officially acknowledged as a Freebird. This is before they gave Jimmy Garvin the wacky makeover and had him dressing up in all the flamboyant gear and all the makeup. And obviously it's important to note here, no Terry Gordy or Buddy Roberts. I always forget what the status of Roberts was by this point. I'm pretty sure Gordy was back over in Japan by this point, which basically left Hayes by himself in Crockett Promotions. And, I mean, since they weren't even considering a singles push for him at the time, they said, well, he needs a tag partner. So, yeah, that Jimmy Garvin guy isn't doing much, right? Fuck it. Put him together in a team. Why not? The early teasings of the future reincarnated Fabulous Freebirds. And they probably thought nothing of it at the time. I mean, the match was nothing, but it is interesting to go back and seeing these guys work together as a team before they were ever talked about as being an official Freebirds pairing. Regardless of what you may have thought about it, whether or not you agreed with it. I have my own thoughts on Jimmy Garvin being a Freebird, but I'll kind of speak more on that as we see the 89 shows roll around. For now, this was about hyping up Garvin and Hayes as a team headed into Starrcade, which was highly ineffective in a lot of ways, since they made no mention of who they would be facing or what they were going to be doing. Hayes talked about fucking girls at the nightclub, and Jimmy put over his brother Ronnie, vowing that Ronnie would be victorious on Thanksgiving when he beats Ric Flair again in the cage. Little did he know. Speaking of the Handsome Devil, Ron Garvin had a match this week with Tommy Angel in one of the greatest squashes of all time, at least when it came to the finish. Ronnie's in there beating up the guy for a minute or two. He's going through all his Garvin stomp sequences where he's just driving his foot into every part of this poor man's anatomy. And after he stomps this guy into next Tuesday, Angel slowly tries to sit up, but he's dazed, so he just sort of falls back into a heap. And Garvin looks at him. He ponders his next move. He's probably thinking, no, I could pin him. But then he decides, I've got it. And he raises Angel back up into a seated position so he could then, like an absolute fucking douchebag, punch this man square in the face as hard as humanly possible. And down goes Tommy Angel into a dead man's position as Garvin finally covers him for the 3. I watched this back like 10 times. I could not get over how hilariously douchey that match or that finish was. Ronnie had the man beat. The Garvin stomps were not enough. He said, no, not yet. I must prove a point. I must hit my knockout punch. Just to add insult to injury. And the way Angel sold it, just brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And then Ronnie did a quick promo afterwards, and a damn good one at that, telling everyone that he's been hunting for Ric Flair since day one, and after several years of slow pursuit, he finally caught the big one, and he got the trophy that came with it. He says that many men in the sport pride themselves on wanting to be the world champion, but very few ever reach the top of the mountain. And while Flair has spent the better part of the last 5 years boasting about being the man, well, as it stands right now, he's a mere challenger. In Ronnie's eyes, he's an ex-world champion. And it's going to stay that way as long as Garvin wants it to. And, well, prior to me actually seeing what happened next, wondering how Flair was going to respond, the recurring thought kept crossing my mind. I'll bet that one sticks in Flair's craw. Of all the things Ronnie said in this promo about him, the one that's going to piss off Flair the most, the fact that he's an ex-world champion, that one's going to sting. And lo and behold, here's Ric Flair at the booth. And I'm just thinking, well, let's see how he responds to being referred to as a challenger, an ex-world champion. Spoiler, didn't go over well with him. Oh, before we get to that, he plugged Starrcade, and he talked about how much of a disgrace it was for Eddie Gilbert and Terry Taylor to walk around claiming to be champions by tearing down Crockett Promotions. Flair tells Gilbert that he doesn't even like Nikita Koloff, but he's even willing to defend the company that he works for because, unlike those UWF pansies, the NWA talent actually back up what they do in the ring by being defending champions, babyface or heel. One of the few moments where Flair and Nikita were actually on the same page about anything. Defending the honor of the company they work for, or just outright defending the honor of pro wrestling. Imagine that. Babyfaces and heels actually having something in common. But of course, he then starts ripping into Ron Garvin's comments about Flair being an ex-world champion. And that's where Flair says that being an ex-champion in any major sport doesn't cut the mustard, especially when you're the world heavyweight champion of the biggest company in the world. Flair's got bankers and financial investors and, most importantly, women, all backing him as the greatest of all time. And he'll be damned if he allows his reputation to be chalked up to anything as a former world champion. Keep in mind, I don't know if this was done intentionally, but the way this is all filmed, they got Flair standing a little off center from the regular podium backdrop. So from the angle he was positioned, we can actually see the TV monitors behind Flair while he's cutting this promo. And on top of seeing Flair in the frame, doing his Seething Heat promo, we also see the reflection of him on the TV monitors behind him and the reflection of the monitors behind that. It was like watching this in a parallel universe. Great visual. And now then he talked about New York City and said there are plenty of strippers that are looking to have a good time. To which I said, no, at least Flair was aware of his surroundings. I would not say that New York is a hotbed for nightclub action, but no, he'll certainly get more of the lifestyle there than, say, Charlotte, North Carolina, of all places. And then we had the mighty Wilbur wrestle the Italian Stallion as the downward trend continues between Wilbur and Paul Jones's chemistry. Wilbur's still going around shaking everyone's hand and trying to be a nice guy. The gentle giant gimmick. Meanwhile, Paul's trying to impose evil acts on him. He wants him to embrace the hate, for lack of better terms. And, well, I've got to admit, as stupid as everything is that I'm seeing here, Paul Jones ain't half-assing it. He's going full-blown wacky heel. Wilbur beats Stallion in about a minute with a splash. Ivan and Warlord immediately hit the ring to dispose of Stallion. And while Paul's admonishing Wilbur in the corner, eventually David Crockett calls Wilbur over for comment. And Paul's not letting Wilbur get a word in edgewise because he has not been given permission to speak. Which naturally leaves Wilbur chuckling and patting Paul Jones on his top hat, calling him a, quote, pudding head. And in one of the single greatest moments of Paul Jones's career, I'm not kidding when I say this. This might have been better than his raging bald-headed geek promo from '86 on Jimmy Valiant. When Wilbur calls this man a pudding head, the overselling rage that came over Paul Jones as he looks at the camera and he does the slow, dramatic, "Ah, don't you ever call me a pudding head." And he's clubbing Wilbur over the chest. He's having a total mental breakdown. It is, it's 1950s sitcom levels of terrible. But hey, like I just said, Paul Jones is diving into this with both feet. He's absolutely accentuating the goofiness. He ain't backing down. And the great thing with the Mighty Wilbur is, I don't deny for a second this man is totally breaking character when he's out there smiling. Just watching Paul Jones being a total cartoon. He's probably legitimately laughing at all this. I probably would be too. I have no idea how long this goes on for, but it's slowly getting over with me. It took a long time for the Paul Jones Army stuff with Handsome Jimmy to get over with me. Maybe this will be the same case, where it eventually surpasses abhorrently terrible and becomes laughably stupid by comparison. Make sure you write that one down, by the way. Don't you ever call me a pudding head. Paul Jones, 1987. God love him. Speaking of laughably stupid, Jim Cornette's outfit this week. Holy fuck. Talk about going all out with the mismatched colors. Fire truck red suit jacket, a lavender dress shirt, and a puke green tie. Even Tony asked, "Where the hell did you get that outfit, Jim?" And, he didn't really cut much of a promo before introducing Bobby and Stan for their match. They wrestled Mike Jackson and some other guy whose name I didn't even bother to write down. Did he ever even get in the ring? I don't recall. I don't think we've ever seen this guy work before. It is important to note, too, the first Midnight's match we've seen on the TBS Superstation in at least 3 weeks. Talked about it before. These guys, totally vanished from the show in recent weeks. And now they're back. Not a moment too soon. And they got to start ramping up excitement for the Rock and Roll Express program again. Not to mention the scaffold stipulation. But I'm sure they'll get around to that eventually. Match was kind of unnoteworthy. Discount the finish. I believe the first official sighting of the Grave Digger, which was Bobby doing the middle rope spine buster. I don't think we've seen that move executed on TV yet. If we have, I apologize for not remembering it. But that left just enough time for Cornette to do a show-closing heel promo on the Rock and Roll Express. And again, it really wasn't much of a promo. We didn't even get any classic cornyisms here. And he mentioned something about Ricky Morton being sickly looking and emaciated. But on the scale of corny insults, that one registered on a lower status. It is important to note, Big Bubba's back. He was also conspicuously off of TV for a period of time. Didn't really get much of a mention on what he was doing at the time. For the record, he was working down in the UWF, and he's back for, I believe, for only a couple months before he gets sideways with the office over contract disputes and then eventually winds up in the WWF. You know, when I look back at the show, it's kind of a weird one to analyze overall. wasn't a bad show. I wouldn't even say I was bored watching it, but it was just kind of a show. It was 2 hours, so they managed to pack a lot of stuff in. Didn't really have any major angles that took place. They did announce a handful of things for the Starrcade card, which is good. But it was kind of a formulaic show with the layout. It was match, promo, match, promo, match, promo, repeat. And while the promos were relatively good, discount the Jimmy Valiant, Bugsy McGraw psychobabble, there just wasn't a whole lot of excitement to it overall. They did a relatively good job building up Starrcade, and they're continuing to piece together a card there. But this particular show, for whatever reason, when it was over, I was like, okay, it was fine. On to the next one, I guess. Maybe I'm being a little overly critical. Like I said, decent show, but I've seen better offerings from Crockett Promotions before. I've seen worse. So, what do you chalk this one up to? Very plain, middle-of-the-road TV show. Oh, this is funny. You know how I've been saying these Mid-South shows just fly by? Well, this week it really flew by. And then I looked at the runtime after the show was over, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. It was only 37 minutes. But that's the amazing thing, too. I didn't even look at the time length of the show before I sat down to watch it. I just opened up the cock and did my thing. And yes, I know, you can take that statement in about a million different directions. In any case, well, Bill Watts is back this week. And obviously the big upcoming event is the Superdome Show on Thanksgiving in New Orleans. Right now they're looking to piece together the card for that program. They got a lot of layered stories happening on the show right now, up and down the card. Some new faces have been arriving in recent weeks. So there's a lot to go through. And what do you say we deep dive and see what Mid-South dished out for this week's show? Beginning right out of the gate, it's a tag team match, playa. Pinning Colonel Buck Robley and Tim Horner up against Ted Allen and some random geek named Marty Lundy. Yeah, funny enough, Lundy very closely resembled another well-known wrestler that we've seen before. I can't put my finger on it, but I think it's somebody famous. Yeah, I don't know. Beats me. So if you immediately overlook my sarcasm, this was mostly an enhancement squash to put over Robley. I think the bigger conversation for a lot of experts and historians out there is noting the fact that this was actually Arn's debut in the Mid-South region. And he would actually stick around through mid-'83 as a job guy before he went off to Southeastern for a period. And then, of course, by '84, he's on his way to Crockett Promotions to form the Minnesota Wrecking Crew with Ole, and eventually working his way into being one of the key horsemen. And I know it's kind of a cliche, but the rest is history. And we were covering that portion of Arn's career right now with the '87 Crockett reviews. This is the real early glimpse of him right when he was first breaking into the business. And he already had the receding hairline even back then. That was the first thing I remember when I saw the footage here. Holy shit. Arn had thinning hair even back then. Poor guy. Now, we'll be seeing plenty more of Marty Lundy matches in Mid-South. It's going to be tough for me to dissociate between Marty Lundy and Arn Anderson. You know, the problem is it's second nature for me to just call him Double A. So I might have to re-educate myself a little bit there. Marty Lundy. I'll just keep hammering that into my head until it becomes muscle memory. Nothing much to really say beyond that, though. Nor is there much to say about Kamala versus Jessie Barr. You kind of know what you're getting with Kamala squashes. They're not visually impressive. But if you understand the Kamala gimmick and you kind of recognize the performer he was, you can look past his apparent downsides as an in-ring worker. He went over Jessie here with a running splash in a couple minutes. I did like Watts pulling a David Crockett here by saying something to the extent of, this Kamala, look at him. He's huge. It's like even the great Bill Watts couldn't help but mark out for giant men with massive body weight. But those were kind of tune-up matches until we got to the actual featured main event for this week's card. A non-title showdown between Ted DiBiase and Mr. Olympia. The North American Heavyweight Champion DiBiase versus Mississippi Heavyweight Champion Mr. Olympia. Well, actually, that's a lie. There were 2 featured main events this week. Possibly a third one. But the match that followed this one was of equal importance. Here, this is more about Watts getting the chance to plug the Loser Leaves Town match that's coming up. I don't know if he ever specified partners for the heels, whether that was DiBiase and Duggan versus JYD and Mr. Olympia. I think it was those two. In any case, they're looking to rematch those men for the Mid-South tag straps due to the controversial finish of their first bout, where the belts were overturned and Duggan and DiBiase had to relinquish the belts back to the babyfaces. Now there is a special stipulation added that the loser of the fall has to leave the Mid-South territory for, I believe it was 30 days. And I remember that story vividly because I know what is forthcoming for the parties involved. Without playing spoiler, I'm not going to go too in-depth. I'll just reserve the conversation to that. But these two are still heavily involved in that story, so they were pitted against each other here. Very enjoyable back-and-forth match. Simple layout where Olympia took the fight to DiBiase from the opening bell. DiBiase tried to play chicken on the floor, but he was able to eventually cut off Olympia and work him over. And right as Olympia is starting to fire a comeback, he goes to hit DiBiase with a running power slam off the ropes. But as DiBiase kicks out, Olympia accidentally lands on top of Alfred Neely. So that allows enough time for DiBiase to go into the ring trunks and pull out the concealed gimmick. And he ends up clocking Olympia with the loaded glove to steal the win. And again, they've been playing up the loaded glove angle with Ted for a while. It is a crucial part of the overarching story that they're leading to with the JYD Olympia saga. Very simple heat finish. Keeps the feud moving along, but they also give Mr. Olympia an outing. It all makes sense. Very formulaic pattern stuff. Doesn't really make for an interesting conversation necessarily when you're reviewing such a simple layout, but you're able to see the logical story progression and what it's all building to. It's good stuff. As is everything they're doing with Mr. Wrestling 2 and the Grappler. Nothing fancy between these two masked individuals, but Wrestling 2 keeps picking up traction with these Mid-South fans every time he's out there winning matches. They had a very similar pattern to the layout of the previous match, only this time they had Grappler try to target Wrestling 2's arm, and he worked that over for the heat, trying to weaken the body limb so he could set up his signature Grappler twist. Didn't work, though, because Wrestling 2 had him scouted. So after he rammed the Grappler into the corner turnbuckle, he caught Grappler with the running knee lift for the pin. Fans immediately jump to their feet and start chanting, 2, 2, 2, which became a patented chant at the Irish Neil Boys Club in Shreveport. I also enjoyed the failed afterbirth attack where Wrestling 2 immediately sidestepped the Grappler and then gave him a second running knee lift to knock him out to the floor. Just one of those easy wrestling layouts where one guy beat another guy clean with his move, and that was it. Didn't need 40,000 run-ins or goofy angles to bog everything down. Ain't that funny? How sometimes keeping things so simple can be the most effective. And then we came back for Hacksaw Duggan challenging Mike Sharp for the Louisiana heavyweight title. Oh, my bad, I must give him his proper pronouns. Iron Mike Sharp. And of course, the first thing my notes indicate here, as if I could be any more blunt, right after I made the joke about Bill Watts pulling a David Crockett by referring to talent as huge. Wow. Duggan and Sharp. They were very huge men. I'm trying to recall how tall Duggan actually was, because Sharp was basically at eye level with him here. It wasn't Duggan like 6'4", 6'5"? He was a tall dude. I didn't realize Mike Sharp was that tall. Maybe it was just the camera angle they were filmed at, but it really stood out here. In any case, really wasn't much to say about the action until the surprise finish. I guess if you can call it that. Definitely an upset. They're out there having the big hoss fight. It's mostly a back and forth match. A little bit of heat on Duggan later on, but it wasn't extensive. And right as Duggan goes to drive Sharp into the corner with the running stampede power slams, Sharp tries to make a comeback on Duggan. But as he goes to lift Duggan up overhead into a backbreaker hold, Duggan slips through. Sharp ends up missing a running charge in the corner. And then Duggan just hits him with a running tackle spear for the 3 count. New champion. Relatively clean too. Which I think it's why it's easy enough to sell it as an upset. Duggan didn't have to cheat to go over. He just hit his finish after Sharp was too exhausted to keep up. And then he won. And I was like, wow. An unexpected twist. But on the other hand, if we're factoring in the direction they're going to be taking the Duggan DiBiase stuff, it kind of makes sense to do a title switch like this. I mean, you've already got DiBiase as the North American heavyweight champion, giving Duggan a regional singles belt to hold on to alongside DiBiase as partners. It adds more prestige to their team. And again, once you throw Matt Bourne in there, you make him the top faction. You give him all the gold. You make him stand out. So I like what they did here. And it gives the heels something to brag about on TV as they continue to work their way up the card in the Mid-South region. So, that left enough time for a couple standby matches. The first of which was Vinny Romeo versus Skandar Akbar's newest protege, as I wrote down. Generic fake bald Russian assassin number 374. This time taking the form of Vladik Smirnov. I don't believe a representative of the vodka brand. Or is that Smirnoff? I always get those two confused. Well, with that said, here's the extent of everything I wrote down. Smirnov was slightly more competent in the ring than Vladimir Petrov, but it was basically in that same vein. He was absolutely abhorrent at running the ropes. He had nothing resembling a physique, or honestly, anything resembling a look, period. He was a generic bald white guy with a beard and a singlet. They just gave him the phony Russian gimmick. He didn't really visibly fuck anything up until the spot at the end where I think he was supposed to pick Vinny's ankles off a dropkick attempt. And instead of him actually catching Vinny with his ankles trapped, he just sort of let Vinny take his own bump. And then Smirnov let go. And the actual finish was him catching Romeo for a sidewalk slam. And in doing so, He managed to hoist Romeo high enough in the air to where it actually looked like he had Romeo's junk in his mouth. So it looked like he was giving him an inadvertent blowjob on the way down. Now see, these are the types of things that we all look for in my wrestling reviews. Fuck the straight ahead conversations. I know how you all people think. You're just waiting for the evident penis jokes. Well, I've got to entertain myself somehow. I guess that's why they call them standby matches, though. Because you're standing by, waiting for anything remotely interesting to talk about. Now, with that match, they were kind enough to give me some comedic relief. The actual final match on the card was Grappler number 2 versus Bob Stabler, which had nothing of note. Grappler just beat him up and then won with a middle rope clothesline. And that left Bill Watts and Boyd Pierce to plug the showdown in 2 weeks. And I did write this down to make sure I got it right. It is apparently Duggan and DiBiase versus Dog and Olympia for the Mid-South tag belts. And again, the loser of the fall having to forcibly leave Mid-South for 30 days. And of course, they're speculating on who that might be. Although it's hard to imagine any of them taking a fall. Which is something you're typically able to sell to the people when you go out of your way to protect top guys and keep them relatively undefeated and strong. That way, when you actually do get situations where one of them have to lose, hey, imagine that. It means something. There are high stakes. Very good show. Very simple. Very straightforward. But they had 2 high-profile matches. One really solid match with a major title switch. Nothing in the way of big angles or anything. Nobody got any promo time. It was a very wrestling-heavy program. But again, this is the kind of formula that works with Mid-South. Some shows are more promo-centric than others. Some have more angles and key ways to advance storylines. But it's always fluctuating, depending on where they are in the taping schedule. And that unpredictability factor is what makes Mid-South so unique. Like, you don't get the same stuff on an endless loop every single week. They're always keeping things fresh. They're always giving you something to look forward to from week to week. And that's what you look for with a wrestling company that has a clue. You know, once you get into the stage where every show becomes so patterned and predictable, what is there to look forward to? Talk about it all the time. It's why companies like AEW never grow beyond a certain threshold. Because every single week, it's the same constant 2 hours of crash TV bullshit. Everything's predictable at this point. And even WWE is the same way. It's not a mutually exclusive conversation. Like, their stuff is just as patterned as AEW stuff is. WWE's just boring and dismal a lot of the time. Like, you can call most of that show in your sleep. But again, reverting back to Mid-South here, they're always giving you reasons to come back and see the following program. And that's why I love going back and seeing these tapes. Hour-long shows. But man, do they pack a lot of action in there. It's just bam, bam, things move along. Keep you on your toes. And that's what you look for. All right. Gotta love that classic Bill Mercer humor. I needed a good belly laugh at the top of the world-class program this week. And all it took was for Bill Mercer to plug the card, referring to Kerry Von Erich as a, quote, wonderful human being, and then immediately referring to the missing link as, quote, another human being. Maybe. Made better by them posting a wacky image of Link on camera for like 2 seconds before cutting away. It's always the dry humor that gets me. Maybe that's why modern wrestling comedy sucks. Because everyone's always trying to deliberately ham it up for the camera. I liked it better when people didn't have to try so hard. I also got a good chuckle out of Kelly Kiniski this week. Make sure you write that one down for safekeeping, because I don't think you'll ever hear the words Kelly Kiniski and comedy in the same sentence ever again. He wrestled in the opener against Mike Reed, which was definitely comedy. Them giving Kelly Kiniski an underneath enhancement match. No, actually, the comedy was right at the beginning, while Mark Lorenz is doing the ring intros, as Kiniski looks directly into the camera and goes, "Ladies, you wish your boyfriends had a neck like mine." I just think, is that something women really pay attention to in men? The length of their neck? Seems like a bit of an odd feature for women to fawn over. But women are also strange creatures, so maybe there is a subset of the female population that has a neck fetish. I don't know. I did note Kelly Kiniski has a buzz cut. He now looks like every generic local job guy you've ever seen work in the territories. Well, to be frank, he works like every local job guy from the territories. But we've already covered how poor Kelly Kiniski was as a pro wrestler. The match was completely unmemorable. Kiniski dominated a lot of it. They gave Reed a little bit of early offense. The only other thing of note here was Bill Mercer referring to a belly-to-back throw as a, quote, "some kind of suplex." And at first I figured, no, maybe Kiniski just fucked it up, so Mercer didn't know how to call it. Then upon second viewing, I was like, maybe he just never saw a belly-to-back suplex before. In any case, Kiniski won with a backbreaker across the knee. I don't really know what the point of it was, other than to apparently give Kiniski a TV win. I mean, he was sporting a new look here, so maybe he was going to get a new push. I guess we'll see if anything comes of it. I actually wrote this down here. It was slightly better than Buck Zumhoff versus Norvell Austin, which was the second match on the card. If Kelly Kiniski versus Mike Reed was 5 minutes of boring action, this was about twice that length of equally boring action. I mean, there's so much I could say about Buck Zumhoff. Every single time I see this guy work, I'm like beyond mesmerized with what I'm seeing. He is so ungodly terrible, but the people eat his shit up like it's the greatest thing in the world. I need to come up with a phrase for the wacky dances he does. Whenever he's firing up on offense and he gets that two-step thing going, it's like watching somebody at the gym doing the high knee exercise, except this guy's doing it to fire himself up. I did get a kick out of the spot. Zumhoff has Austin trapped in the head scissors, and of course Norvell Austin's a heel, so he's trying to shout some stuff to the official while he's in the hold. So what does he say? He says, "He's messing up my hair," which is hilarious if you think about the idea that this man is having his neck cranked on. So what is Norvell's primary concern? The fact that his hair is getting fucked up. Now that is being a heel. Great line. It was a million times better than him getting the heat on Zumhoff, where he's just messing up spots left and right, and Zumhoff has no idea how to feed for it. Generally, this is all about the afterbirth. They kept methodically putting the camera on the boombox outside the ring, and with Coco Ware hanging out on the floor, I kind of figured the gimmick was going to come into play at some point. Sure enough, after Zumhoff rolls up Austin and cradles him for the 3, The heels immediately jump him and destroy the boombox. They gave him a clothesline spot off the ropes, as Zumhoff came precariously close to cracking the back of his head off the boombox, which would probably not have been fun. But I guess you can argue the heels got their heat back. I think that heavily relies on the fans being invested in Buck Zumhoff's shitty boombox gimmick. I can't even really say they booed when the heels stomped it into oblivion. They just kind of sat there on their hands and went, huh. Oh, that's rather unfortunate. They destroyed his gimmick. I don't think they had a strong attachment to the boombox. But then we come back for the best thing on the whole show. Oddly enough, it involved Jake Roberts in an interview segment. He is slowly becoming the must-see attraction on this program every week. We are back in the locker room with Mark Lorenz, and he's got Jake Roberts on standby for comment on the upcoming six-man tag title match. It's him, Gino, and Chris Adams versus the Von Erichs. He noted this as an unlikely alliance because nobody saw it coming. But for Jake, it's about more than just the six-man belts, because all he wants to do is drop the Von Erichs with a DDT. He wants to put them in a local medical facility. Talked about how he already put Kevin on the hit list, and now Mike and Kerry are soon to follow. And then we had Adams come in to share his insight. Well, to try to sum it up, Chris's message was that everybody keeps trying to insinuate that he's changed, but the reality is that he's the exact same person he's always been. He's just turning up the aggression now because he's sick and tired of living in the Von Erich shadow. He chastised the fans for being hypocrites, because the same Dallas faithful that are now booing Chris are the exact same people that cheered him 3 weeks ago when he was standing by the Von Erich side, which is a valid claim. So he kind of gave one of those lazy WWE explanations of, I didn't turn my back on the fans. You people turned your back on me. And we also had Gary Hart chime in here, immediately getting in Lorenz's face for asking Chris questions without his consent. To be honest, he really didn't have much to add. He told everybody that Chris Adams is gunning for the NWA World Heavyweight title, looking to challenge Ricky Flair. And that was basically all there was to it. Best part of the whole segment, though, and this is the payoff. I'm so glad they kept this in as part of the tape, too. It was so perfect. Right as they finish the promo, Lorenz goes to pitch back to ringside, and Jake Roberts has to make sure he sneaks into the frame one last time so that he can stick his tongue out at Lorenz and make a stank face. Like, imagine a fucking preschooler trying to troll the teacher behind his back. That is what Jake Roberts looked like here. It was so childish, but it was so great. God. I should have screen capped it. No, I'm kicking myself for not doing it. Jake is the best. He's the absolute GOAT. I don't care what anybody says. But that all tied in with the next match. It's Chris Adams and Jake Roberts versus Joel Strongbow and George Weingroff. I am convinced that Joel Strongbow has now put on 50 pounds in the belly region since the last time I saw him wrestle. He never really had a physique to begin with, but he legitimately had tits here. And I don't recall Strongbow having visible man boobies the last time I saw him. That said, it was actually a pretty decent match. Strongbow's not really good, but whenever he's in there getting worked over during the heat portion, the selling was fine. His offense is always the stuff that looks lousy. Actually, there was one specific spot here that was so terrible. Even Bill Mercer legitimately called the spot as if Joel Strongbow had CTE. I'm not kidding. Strongbow was making his comeback. He caught Roberts with a leg drop. And as he starts trying to throw some chops and punches, all of a sudden, for literally no reason, he grabs a hold. And I know that's wrestling slang for a lot of people out there, but I'm not exaggerating. He legitimately grabbed a headlock during the comeback for no reason. He was in control. Roberts wasn't trying to cut him off. He just said, nah, fuck it. I have no idea what to do now, so I'm just going to put Jake in a standing headlock. And we're going to remain in place. Can you imagine that? You're making the babyface comeback. You are in control of the match. And while you're firing up on the heel, you randomly decide to grab the guy and put him in a stationary headlock. Talk about a surefire way to kill the crowd. Now, once Weingroff got in there and started actually doing stuff, the action was better. Heels did a good job feeding for Weingroff's offense. And I like this finish. After Jake drapes Weingroff over the top rope, kind of like a modified slingshot suplex, but he didn't actually take him all the way over, he tags in Chris Adams. Adams casually gets in the ring. He looks at Weingroff as he's staggering to his feet. And then he just super kicks him in the face and pins him. I was like, huh. That was interesting. Just casually walk into the ring, hit a guy with his super kick, and you pin him. Nothing flashy. It was almost too simple as a finish. I was not expecting that. The last couple minutes were good. The people legitimately popped anytime the babyfaces hit Adams with anything. I'm not kidding you. Anytime he got kicked, punched, or taken off his feet in any capacity, huge pop. Bigger pop than Jake Roberts getting taken off his feet. These people hated Chris Adams. And I actually wrote that down here. Chris Adams is now full-fledged heel to the Dallas faithful. He has crossed that forbidden line of targeting the Von Erichs. And now he's officially a bad guy for life. But he'll still try to convince the people that he's the same guy. What a hypocrite. The Dallas faithful know better. That ain't gonna fly with them, brother. So that was that. Could have been the main event of the show, but for whatever reason, they decided to waste our time for 2 minutes by doing a missing link Kerry Von Erich match that, of course, went to a double disqualification. The only thing of note here was the hilarious visual of Kerry Von Erich fucking up the skin the cat spot, where he tried to flip himself back into the ring over the top rope and somehow managed to get himself tangled up in the ropes like a total goofball. Now, that was worth it for just that 5-second snippet. And then Mike Von Erich came out at the end and I rolled my eyes. I was like, are you kidding me? Mike Von Erich, of all people, to try to make the save? What a rib. I don't even really know how else to describe it. Like, that entire final segment was the epitome of, now we have 3 minutes of TV time to kill, so let's shoot a completely random angle with the Von Erichs and Devastation Inc. As if that's a storyline that needs to be revisited. Remove that. The show really had one thing of note. The continuation of Chris Adams' heel turn and the affiliation with Jake Roberts and Gino Hernandez. Elsewise, it was a totally missable show. There was really nothing else happening here. Discount a few of my snide remarks when it comes to the mid-card talent. But if you're following along in the timeline of Chris Adams' heel run in Dallas, this is a good show to watch if you want to see more character development. But on that note, I guess we can wrap things up for this one. So we'll be back on the Monday show for the Retro Raw, for the Retro NXT, and the WWE SmackDown rundown. That's a very weird thing to say. A SmackDown rundown. Maybe we should start titling the show that. In any case, again, I appreciate anybody that comes back to check out the show. I hope people kind of like the classic wrestling formula. I'm enjoying myself doing it. I really am. I think the Mid-South reviews are definitely going to be worth the investment for the future of the channel. And just kind of divvying up things a little bit to split the difference. So you got the classic reviews on one show and then more of the WWF, WWE content on the other show. So it doesn't keep everything in one box, if you know what I mean. But thanks for watching. We'll see you guys on Monday, and take care. Peace out.